the first chapter. Want to just remind you that every chapter's PowerPoints has the learning objectives for that chapter in the beginning. There's a tendency to want to just skip over these learning objectives, but they're a pretty powerful tool to help you with learning. And I would suggest that you look at them at the beginning of your study of a chapter, while you're in the process of studying, and as you move towards the end of your study time and are coming up on the next exam. So for example, if you look at this very first objective, define the term nutrition, I can almost guarantee you that there will be perhaps a multiple choice question that will deal with the definition of the term nutrition. So if you paid attention to that objective, you would already know that that's something that you will be asked about. I'm going to skip over them right now, but I would encourage you to spend time with them, especially in the midst of your studying this material. Why do we study nutrition? One of the essential reasons we study nutrition is because it has such an impact on our health. And this slide is showing us causes of death in the United States. And if we look at causes of death, we see that diseases of the heart, cancer, cerebrovascular diseases like stroke, diabetes, kidney disease, chronic liver disease, all of these have major relationships to our diet and to nutrition. Nutrition can be in part causal. Nutrition could be preventative. Nutrition certainly will play a role in helping us manage those diseases and live with them as successfully and as long as possible. So nutrition impacts the quality and the length of our life. Here's that definition of nutrition. I'm going to let you go ahead and read that over and become familiar with it, but we know that's one of our learning objectives, so spend a little bit of time considering this definition. Now, a nutrient is a chemical substance that is essential for health, and the body can't or traditionally doesn't make enough of this substance. So we have to consume it. An essential nutrient has functions. Sometimes it has more than one function, but we will say, for example, that calcium has a role in the maintenance of bone health. When we see an absence from the diet of this particular nutrient, there will be some drop in the body's ability to function, something that won't work as well as previously. Sometimes this will show up as a disease condition. We also note that if we add this nutrient back into the diet, we can restore the normal situation that we had previously. There's one exception to this, and that is if the nutrient deficiency has gone on for a fairly lengthy period of time, there may be some permanent damage that we cannot reverse. Here's a listing of the nutrients. And take a little bit of time and look over those. They will all show up in later chapters. If we think about nutrients in terms of their functional abilities or how they work, we can say that many nutrients have the function of providing the energy or the fuel that your body needs to do its work. Some nutrients are closely linked to growth and development, and others are more regulatory and control the chemical reactions and processes that go on in your body. We also talk about nutrients in terms of the amount that we need. A macronutrient is needed in fairly large amounts. The macronutrients are the carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and water. The micronutrients are needed in very small amounts. Vitamins and minerals fall into that category. If you take a look at our graduate courses that are offered at Mount Mary, you'll see that there's actually a human nutrition macronutrient course and human nutrition micronutrient course. And so those classes are taking a look at these nutrients, but in even more detail. However, they divide them by macro and by micro. The first major nutrient category that we will study is carbohydrates. They are composed of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. We get them from fruits, vegetables, grains, and beans, legumes. All carbohydrates provide us about 4 calories per gram. Remember, a gram, there's 28 grams in an ounce. There's 16 ounces in a pound. So a gram is quite small, but 4 calories, regardless of what kind of carbohydrate we're talking about. There are 2 main types, those that are small chemically, sometimes also called simple. Examples of these are the molecules that make up table sugar. You also have heard comments about blood glucose. Again, a monosaccharide that is small enough that it can float around in your bloodstream. Carbohydrates are also complex. That just means they're a much bigger compound. Starches, animal starch or glycogen, and fiber fall into that category. The second nutrient category is lipids. Lipids are also composed of carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen. Two big differences though. They, unlike carbs, do not mix in water. Well, water and oil, water and fat, in fact, don't mix. So chemically different and packed with energy. That gram of lipids provides our body with 9 calories, okay, over twice what carbohydrates do. The term fat is used for a lipid that would be solid at room temperature, and oil is used for a lipid that would be liquid at room temperature. Triglycerides are the form that lipids simply like to be in. If we were to look at the fat that is in your body or the fat that is in your food, we're going to find that it likes to be in the form of a triglyceride. It just simply is most comfortable being that way. And so we will say that triglycerides are the major energy source for the body. What do they look like from a chemist's point of view? Well, they have this glycerol molecule. This is almost half of a glucose molecule. I tend to think of it as the glue or the backbone that holds 3 separate fatty acids together. And so the fatty acids that you see here are in white and gray. So tri, because I have 3 hooked to the glycerol. So if you had some avocado toast this morning and you really enjoyed the smoothness and the texture of that avocado, you were enjoying the taste and sensation of triglycerides in your avocado. Lipids chemically can also be saturated or they can be unsaturated. If they are saturated fats, we tend to think of them as solid at room temperature, linked a bit more commonly to animal food sources. They are noted, especially in the case of meat, not so much dairy, but meat, to raise our blood cholesterol levels and thereby potentially promote early cardiovascular disease. The unsaturated fats are mainly liquid at room temperature, are mainly found in plant sources, and are healthier than saturated fats. So here, think of olive oil compared to bacon, which would be a saturated fat. One more thing about lipids is they are an essential nutrient. It turns out that there are 2 fatty acids that we absolutely must eat in our diet. They are both unsaturated, linoleic and alpha-linolenic acid. And these fatty acids are found within every cell wall in your body. They have a major role in regulating your blood pressure as well as normal functioning of your nerves. We find them because they're unsaturated and they tend to be liquid. We tend to find them in vegetable oils and we tend to find them in fish. Another kind of lipid that occurs rarely naturally, I don't want to say there are no natural trans fatty acids, but most trans fatty acids have been created in food processing. So I primarily found them in deep fried foods, snack foods, and solid fats. For example, how do I make a liquid oil into a solid margarine? We do note that trans fatty acids have posed a major health risk. They are not, for the most part, natural. Our liver does not deal with them very well, and they were definitely contributing to atherosclerosis and heart disease. Fortunately, we have moved to a point where food manufacturers have more or less eliminated these from our food supply, so they're not the issue for us that they were in years past. The third nutrient group is protein. It's composed of carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, and something unique we haven't seen before, nitrogen. Protein is a major component of many, many things in the body, but it also provides us with energy, 4 calories a gram, just like carbohydrates. And the building block of proteins is amino acids. So here we see protein-rich foods, and an example of a protein that my body and your body built from the amino acids that came to us from these foods. So you and I might have had an egg today, and eventually some of those amino acids may make their way into a hemoglobin molecule. You remember that my body and your body actually builds that hemoglobin. But from the proteins that we eat. The hemoglobin protein is found in your red blood cells, and its function is to carry oxygen all throughout the body. Now, a micronutrient, vitamins. 13 different vitamins. We tend to divide them into 2 groups, those that dissolve in fat and those that dissolve in water. Vitamins themselves, we need such tiny, tiny amounts. Vitamins may play a role in regulating chemical reactions in our body, but in and of themselves, they do not contain any potential energy. So we don't think of them as having fuel or providing us with calories. Those that are fat soluble dissolve in fat. Vitamins A, D, E, and K are in that category. Those that are water soluble, which includes vitamin C and the B vitamins, well, they go where water goes. Now, if you stop and think about this, if you and I drink a lot of water, we respond and we eliminate the excess that our bodies don't need, primarily through urination. It turns out that we treat water-soluble vitamins for the most part the same way. If I get too much vitamin C or the B vitamins, I just eliminate them in my urine for the most part. Fat-soluble vitamins are not the same story. I don't have a way to urinate away excess fat. I tend to turn it into body fat and store it. And if I'm unlucky, I will be dragging it around with me for the next 40 years. Likewise, I have no good way to eliminate the fat-soluble vitamins from my body, and they are much more likely to build up and have toxic side effects. Minerals, again, a micronutrient, not carbon-based, okay, not based on carbon and hydrogen, but are elements or rocks like iron and sodium and calcium. They're very stable and not destroyed by cooking. They regulate and are building components of many, many things for normal body functions. But like vitamins, they do not themselves contain any energy or calories. We do study them in two ways. Major minerals, which we need in relatively larger amounts, in grams, and the trace minerals that we need in very microscopic amounts, less than 100 milligrams per day. Not surprisingly, it's much more difficult to study the trace minerals, even to determine how much is in foods and then what our bodies are doing with them, because they're so present in such tiny amounts, among other reasons. And then last, but certainly not least, water. A nutrient that we need most urgently and in some rather large amounts. We get water from food and drink, but our bodies also do make a certain amount as a byproduct of the chemical reactions that your body normally does. Another category of substances that is important to diet but not essential nutrients are the phytochemicals and the zoochemicals. The phytochemicals are compounds that are found in plants and provide us with health benefits. The zoochemicals are likewise positive for our health and found in foods of animal origin. They aren't considered to be essential nutrients. The body functions quite well without them, but there seem to be some, again, positive aspects to making sure that we have them in our food choices. And spend a couple of minutes looking through these examples of phytochemicals and their food sources. Phytochemicals and the zoochemicals. Okay, so energy is obviously the fuel that our body needs to function and do its work. Carbohydrates, proteins, and fats contain energy within the chemical bonds of these substances. There is only one more substance that our bodies can use for energy, and that is alcohol. Alcohol does not meet the definition of a nutrient. There are no deficiency diseases that show up if we don't include alcohol, but it is certainly a source of calories. So we will measure calories in the scientific kilocalorie. And one source, well, you'll become familiar with several sources as we go through the course, but we can see right away that this is a nutrition fact label. It's pretty common type honey wheat bread. And the calories contained in it, and here you see it's the capital C, but this is actually a kilocalorie, 80. 1 gram of fat, well, 1 gram has 9 calories, so that is about 9 calories. 15 grams of carbohydrate, and there's 4 calories in a gram. 15 times 4 is 60, and then there are 3 grams of protein. 3 times 4 is 12. That totals 82 calories. The nutrition facts labels are allowed to do a little bit of rounding. But again, it's the carbs, the proteins, and the fat that are all contributing to the total calories from this food. So again, the calorie, and this is what we use when we talk to the public. Um, the calorie itself with just the C is very tiny. Um, I don't want to say that this is 45 calories worth of butter. I want to say this is 45 calories worth of butter. I don't want to say this is 4,500 calories worth of butter. So we are really using the term for a kilocalorie, which is an amount of heat energy. I think we have not discussed that alcohol contains 7 calories per gram, but our seniors who are out doing their practicums right now are still using these numbers. You will use these numbers 4, 4, 9, and 7 for the rest of your career, so you may as well just commit them to memory. And again, some more example of how this breaks down. If a hamburger contains 39 grams of carbohydrate times 4 calories per gram, 156. And you can see how we look at each of these energy containing compounds and come up with our total calories or kilocalories for these two different dietary items. Okay, we're going to spend a little time doing some math in class, and we'll talk about percentages of calories. But one of the things that we really consider is what percent of my calories should come from fat, what percent of my calories should come from carbohydrates. The typical American diet is about 50% of calories from carb, 33% from fat, and 16% from protein. That in and of itself is actually relatively healthful, but there are some obvious other problems besides the percent of energy intake in the American diet. Too many calories are being consumed. We know that overweight and obesity are increasing quite rapidly. We probably get too much protein from animal sources. Most people in the US would benefit by getting more protein from plant sources. And this is not to suggest that the entire population needs to become vegetarian, but there would be many health benefits to a few more meatless meals and plant-based proteins being consumed. In our carbohydrates, probably too many of them are of sugary origin and too few of them contain complex carbohydrates with fiber. As we look at our fat intake, probably too much comes from animal sources and too little comes from plants. There's one exception to this, and I admit to being confused about the state of research at this point in time, but the meat that comes to us from, the fat that comes to us from meat doesn't appear to be incredibly healthful for us, although there are other healthful components in meat, like protein and iron. But the saturated fat that comes to us from dairy doesn't seem to have the same negative effect. And there's getting to be a lot of conflicting evidence or research out there about the role of dairy. So that will be one of those things that you'll be hearing more about, and I will be admitting to not quite knowing what I should be saying about dairy products. Most people in the United States could stand to eat more foods that are rich in vitamins A, E, iron, and calcium. We would be helped if we did not have such a high sodium, sugar, and intake of fatty foods. And generally, most of us could eat more fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and put a question mark by the reduced fat dairy. When we met for our 1 hour last week, we talked a little bit about what had influenced your food choices over the last 24 hours. And we came to realize that food choices are incredibly complex. It's tied to our social needs, it's tied to our emotional needs, our psychological needs, and toss into the mix that we are responding to a body that sends us messages, messages that we are hungry, as well as messages related to appetite. There is a difference between hunger and appetite. Hunger being that I physically am running out of immediate fuel. I really want to eat. I'll probably eat almost anything because I am really hungry. Appetite is much more a psychological desire to eat. I'm really wanting chocolate. I'm really wanting something salty and crunchy. Um, you hit on most of these influences. I think maybe the one on the list that we did not talk about was marketing and advertising. Obviously, the marketing of food works, or we would not see companies putting all of the money into advertising that they do. Okay, so read over these, all the needs, and again, recognize that your food choices are incredibly complicated.